In my profession, you learn very quickly that human beings are terrible liars. They stumble over their words, their eyes dart around the room, and they sweat when the pressure gets too high. But numbers? Numbers never sweat. Numbers never stutter. And most importantly, numbers never lie. I am a senior forensic accountant. For the past 12 years, my job has been to walk into the ruins of collapsed corporations, look through the ashes of their financial records, and find out exactly who struck the match. I track missing millions through labyrinthine offshore accounts. I decipher complex shell company structures, and I put white-collar criminals in federal prison. It's meticulous, quiet, and exhausting work. My husband, David, always told me my job was tragically boring. He had no idea that my boring skills were about to become the instrument of his total destruction. David was the CEO and founder of Apex Capital, a boutique investment firm that catered to high-net-worth individuals. When we first met, he was just an ambitious guy with a good pitch deck and a rented suit. I loved his drive. I supported him, managed his early books for free, and paid our mortgage while he got Apex off the ground. But over the last 3 years, as the firm exploded in valuation, the man I married disappeared. He was replaced by a caricature of Wall Street arrogance. The rented suits turned into custom Tom Ford tailoring. The sensible sedan became a matte black Porsche 911. He started wearing a Rolex Daytona that cost more than my first car. He became obsessed with optics and synergy, tossing around corporate buzzwords to mask the fact that he was spending less and less time actually working. Along with the money came Chloe. She was 24, blonde, and officially listed on the Apex payroll as David's executive lifestyle coordinator. Whenever I asked what that title actually meant, David would laugh, pour himself a glass of $200 scotch, and say, "She handles the logistics so I can focus on the vision, honey." You wouldn't understand. It's not just spreadsheets and calculators. He treated me like a relic from his past, a dusty calculator he kept on the shelf for tax season. I ignored the red flags because I was blinded by loyalty. I ignored the late-night emergency meetings, the sudden weekend trips to Miami, and the expensive perfume that lingered on his jackets. I told myself it was just the stress of running a massive fund. I was a fool, but I wasn't stupid. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening in late March. It was tax season, which meant I was buried in paperwork in my home office. David had rushed out for a critical dinner with a prospective client, leaving his private study in a mess. I went in to grab a stapler and noticed that he had left his personal wall safe slightly ajar. David was usually paranoid about that safe. Curiosity, fueled by months of quiet suspicion, finally got the better of me. I pulled the heavy steel door open. Inside, sitting beneath his passports and a stack of bearer bonds, was a sleek, unmarked silver laptop. It wasn't his company computer. It wasn't a device I had ever seen before. I took the laptop to my desk and booted it up. It was password protected, encrypted with a standard BitLocker drive. For a normal wife, this would be a dead end. For a senior forensic auditor, it was a minor inconvenience. People who think they are smarter than everyone else always use predictable patterns. David's arrogance was his biggest security flaw. It took me less than 15 minutes, using a combination of his old frat house nickname and the founding date of his company, to bypass the lock screen. When the desktop loaded, I didn't find a smoking gun. I found a fully loaded arsenal. There was a folder labeled C Logistics. Inside were hundreds of photos and videos. David and Chloe in Paris, David and Chloe on a yacht in St. Bart's. Receipts for a $40,000 diamond tennis bracelet. The betrayal hit me like a physical punch to the chest. My hands shook and tears stung my eyes. The man I had loved, the man I had supported when he had nothing, had been financing a parallel life with a woman 10 years younger than me. For about 5 minutes, I was just a broken, heartbroken wife. But then, my eyes drifted to another folder on the desktop. It was simply titled, Apex Internal Read Only. I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and clicked it open. The heartbroken wife died in that moment, and the forensic accountant took the wheel. What I saw on that screen made the infidelity look like a minor traffic violation. I was looking at a shadow ledger. It was a complete, unedited record of Apex Capital's actual cash flow. David wasn't just cheating on me, he was running a massive, highly illegal Ponzi-adjacent embezzlement scheme. He was taking millions of dollars from his new investors and funneling it directly into an offshore holding company in the Cayman Islands called Horizon Ventures. But the horror didn't stop there. As I dug deeper into the PDF files, I found copies of Apex Capital's official IRS filings for the last 3 years, the documents that verified the firm was legally compliant. At the bottom of every single fraudulent 1099, every falsified corporate tax return, and every fake audit report, there was a digital signature. It was my digital signature. The blood drained from my face, leaving me feeling icy and detached. David hadn't just stolen millions. He knew the feds would eventually catch on to the missing money. And when they did, he had laid the perfect paper trail to ensure that his boring bean counter wife, a licensed CPA who technically had access to his home network, would take the fall. He was going to take the millions, take Chloe to an island with no extradition treaty, and leave me facing 20 years in federal prison for masterminding a financial fraud I knew nothing about. He thought he was playing 4D chess. He thought I would be too blinded by the divorce to notice the financial trap closing around my neck. I didn't scream. I didn't smash his expensive scotch. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen as the cold blue light washed over my face. He wanted to use my profession against me. He wanted to weaponize my signature. I slowly opened a blank, encrypted spreadsheet on my own secure server. I titled it Operation Overreach. If David wanted an audit, I was going to give him the most thorough, devastating, and mathematically perfect audit in the history of the IRS. The hardest part wasn't finding the money. It was looking at David across the breakfast table the next morning and not plunging a steak knife into his expensive silk tie. He sat there scrolling through his phone, probably texting Chloe about their future life in paradise, while I poured him his favorite organic coffee. To him, I was just a part of the furniture, a reliable, slightly outdated appliance that kept his life running smoothly while he planned my legal execution. I realized then that my invisibility was my greatest weapon. David had spent years dismissing my intelligence, and now I was going to use that arrogance to bury him. "You're quiet today, Sarah," he said, not even looking up from his screen. His voice had that condescending edge he'd developed recently, the tone you use with a child or a pet. "Just thinking about the garden, honey," I replied, my voice steady and perfectly modulated. "The hydrangeas need pruning. It's going to be a lot of work this spring." He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Well, don't strain yourself. Maybe we'll just hire someone to do it. Or maybe you won't have to worry about this garden much longer." He caught himself, a small smirk playing on his lips. He thought he was being clever, dropping hints about the divorce he was about to spring on me. He didn't know that I was already 5 steps ahead of him. The moment he left for the office in his roaring Porsche, I went to work. I didn't just have the silver laptop, I had the key to his entire digital life. Using my credentials as a senior auditor, I set up a mirrored cloud drive. Every file he accessed, every email he sent from his private Horizon Ventures account, and every wire transfer he authorized would now be instantly copied to a secure, encrypted server I had hidden behind 3 layers of VPNs. I wasn't just watching him, I was haunting him. I spent the next 14 hours straight analyzing the Horizon Ventures ledger. It was a masterpiece of corruption. David was using a classic layering technique. He'd take investment capital from Apex, move it through 3 different shell companies in Delaware, then skip it across to a bank in Luxembourg before finally landing it in the Cayman account. To a standard auditor, it would look like legitimate consulting fees and market research expenses. But I wasn't a standard auditor. I was the person companies hired to find exactly this kind of rot. By Tuesday afternoon, I had mapped out a total of $5.8 million in embezzled funds. But then I found the morality clause document. It was a draft for our divorce settlement, prepared by a high-priced firm that specialized in high-conflict separations. David's plan was even more sociopathic than I had imagined. He had fabricated evidence of me having an affair with a fictional contractor, and he'd tied it to the financial fraud. He was going to claim that I stole the money to fund my secret life, and that he was the heartbroken husband who had just discovered his wife was a criminal. He was literally building a cage for me, bar by bar, using the very profession I had dedicated my life to. I felt a wave of cold fury wash over me, but I didn't let it break my focus. I opened a new file on my secure drive and titled it The Whistleblower Protocol. In the United States, the IRS has a very specific program for people who report major tax fraud. It's called the Whistleblower Office. If you provide original information that leads to the recovery of taxes, penalties, and interest, the government pays you a reward of up to 30% of the collected proceeds. David thought he was framing me for a $5 million theft. He didn't realize he was actually handing me a multi-million-dollar lottery ticket, paid for by his own downfall. I began compiling the audit package. I didn't just include the spreadsheets. I included the metadata that proved the fraudulent returns were created on his silver laptop, not my workstation. I gathered the GPS logs from his car that showed him visiting Chloe's luxury apartment when he was supposed to be at emergency board meetings. I even found the digital breadcrumbs of him purchasing 2 one-way tickets to a non-extradition country for a date 3 weeks away. That evening, when David came home, he brought me flowers. Lilies, my least favorite. He was acting extra attentive, a classic sign of a man who feels guilty, or in his case, a man who is about to pull the trigger on a betrayal. "I was thinking, Sarah," he said, pouring 2 glasses of wine, "maybe we should take a little break, just you and me. After tax season is over, of course. You've been working so hard." "That sounds lovely, David," I said, taking a sip of the wine. It tasted like ash. "Where were you thinking?" "Oh, somewhere tropical. Somewhere we can just disappear for a while." He toasted me, his eyes gleaming with the secret knowledge of his escape. I smiled back, the perfect image of the devoted, oblivious wife. "I'd love to disappear, David. I really would." What he didn't know was that while we were sitting there, my automated scripts were finishing the final upload to the IRS secure portal. I wasn't just filing a report, I was initiating a federal avalanche. I had also sent a blind carbon copy of the embezzlement evidence to the primary investors of Apex Capital, the kind of men who don't go to the police, but rather send people in dark suits to ask very difficult questions. David wanted to play 4D chess? Fine. But he had forgotten that in chess, the queen is the most dangerous piece on the board. And this queen was about to take his king, his castle, and every single pawn he had ever played. Filing a whistleblower report with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division isn't like calling the local police. They don't show up with sirens blazing an hour later. They are methodical, bureaucratic, and terrifyingly thorough. I knew it would take them at least a few weeks to quietly verify my data, subpoena the offshore routing numbers, and build an airtight federal indictment. During that waiting period, I had to live with the enemy. I had to sleep next to a man who was actively trying to frame me for a $5 million felony. But I didn't just wait. I prepared the battlefield. My first priority was severing my own financial arteries from David's infected network. If the feds dropped the hammer, every asset tied to David's name, or our joint names, would be instantly frozen in a civil asset forfeiture. I quietly opened a new, unlinked account at a small regional bank and transferred my personal, legitimate consulting earnings into it. I placed a hard freeze on my social security number with all 3 credit bureaus and removed myself as an authorized user on his black Amex cards. I went through the house and digitally backed up every single receipt, appraisal, and title document. I was building a firewall around my life, ensuring that when David's empire burned to the ground, I wouldn't even smell like smoke. The true test of my patience came a week later. Apex Capital was hosting its annual Spring Charity Gala at a 5-star hotel downtown. It was a grotesque display of wealth, designed to lure in new investors under the guise of philanthropy. I had to attend. I had to wear the designer gown, smile for the cameras, and play the role of the devoted, lucky wife. And, of course, Chloe was there. She was wearing a stunning backless red dress, but it was the jewelry that caught my eye. Glinting under the chandelier lights wrapped around her delicate wrist was the $40,000 diamond tennis bracelet I had seen the receipts for on David's encrypted hard drive. She paraded around the ballroom with the arrogant confidence of a woman who thought she had already won the war. At one point, when David was cornered by a group of tech investors, Chloe practically sauntered over to my table. She wanted to gloat. She wanted to mark her territory. "Sarah," she purred, holding her champagne glass with the hand that showcased the diamonds. "You look tired. David works you too hard with all those boring tax forms." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, letting my eyes drop to her wrist. "Not at all, Chloe. I actually find the details quite fascinating. For instance, that's a beautiful bracelet. Custom piece." She preened, holding her arm up slightly. "It is. A gift from a very generous mentor. It's important to surround yourself with people who recognize your true value." I offered her a warm, maternal smile, the kind a spider gives a fly. "Absolutely. And David mentioned you're taking on more administrative responsibilities. He said you're officially listed as a signing officer for Horizon Ventures now. That's a huge step up from executive assistant." Chloe's eyes flashed with pride. She couldn't resist validating her own importance, even to the wife of the man she was sleeping with. "Well, David trusts me. He knows I can handle the international logistics. I actually authorized my first major wire transfer to the Caymans just yesterday. It's thrilling, really, playing in the big leagues." My heart did a cold, victorious leap. I had just verbally confirmed what the document suggested. Chloe wasn't just a mistress receiving stolen gifts. By knowingly authorizing wire transfers for a fraudulent offshore shell company, she had legally crossed the line into money laundering. She had just confessed to a federal crime in front of a forensic auditor. "Thrilling is certainly one word for it, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "Just make sure you always read the fine print before you sign your name." "The big leagues play for keeps?" She rolled her eyes and walked away, dismissing me as a jealous, bitter older woman. She had no idea she had just handed me the rope I needed to hang her right next to David. The climax of David's master plan arrived that Thursday evening. I was sitting in the living room reading a book when he walked in, looking somber. He didn't offer a greeting. He just dropped a thick manila envelope onto the coffee table. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, using his best compassionate CEO voice. "I didn't want to do this, but you've left me no choice. I've discovered what you've been doing." I slowly closed my book. "What I've been doing, David?" "Don't play dumb," he snapped, his faux compassion dropping for a second. "I hired an independent auditor to look at my home office network. I know you've been using my servers to funnel company money into private accounts. I know about the missing $5 million. It was a breathtaking performance. He was actually trying to gaslight me into believing his own fabricated narrative. "Those are divorce papers," he continued, pointing at the envelope. "They include a settlement offer. If you sign them, give up your claim to the house, and walk away quietly, I won't go to the authorities about your embezzlement. I'll let you keep your freedom. But if you fight me, Sarah, I swear to God I will hand the evidence to the FBI tomorrow morning. You have 48 hours to pack your things." He turned and walked upstairs, probably to call Chloe and tell her the trap was set. I sat alone in the quiet living room, looking at the thick stack of papers. He was giving me 48 hours. I picked up my phone and dialed a secure number I had memorized a week ago. A man answered on the second ring. "Special Agent Harris," the voice said. "Agent Harris, this is Sarah," I replied, my voice steady. My husband just presented the forged documents. He's booked the flight to the Bahamas for Saturday. He's preparing to run. Understood, Sarah, the agent replied, the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. The grand jury signed the indictment an hour ago. We have the warrants for Apex Capital and Horizon Ventures. We're moving in tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I hung up the phone and looked at the divorce papers. David thought he had 48 hours. He actually had less than 12. The Queen was about to move. Friday morning arrived with a crisp, clear blue sky, the kind of day that feels like a fresh start. For David, it was the dawn of his new millionaire bachelor life. For me, it was execution day. He came down to the kitchen wearing a brand new tailored navy suit, practically vibrating with arrogant energy. He poured his coffee, looked at me sitting in my robe with my hair intentionally messy, and offered a look of profound pity. I have meetings all morning, Sarah, he said, checking his Rolex. I expect your bags to be packed by the time I get home at 6. Leave your house keys on the counter. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. If you play nice, I might even write you a small check to help you get a cheap apartment. I'll have everything sorted out today, David, I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed on my mug. You won't have to worry about me anymore. Good, he said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. It's for the best. And with that, he walked out the door, climbed into his Porsche, and drove off to his kingdom. The moment the sound of his engine faded down the street, I dropped the act. I went upstairs, showered, and walked into my closet. I bypassed the casual clothes and went straight to the back, pulling out my armor, a tailored charcoal gray Armani suit I had bought years ago to wear to federal court testimonies. I paired it with black heels and tied my hair back into a severe, professional knot. I wasn't Sarah the heartbroken housewife today. I was Sarah the senior forensic auditor, and I had an appointment downtown. I arrived at the Apex Capital building at 8:45 a.m. The firm occupied the entire penthouse floor of a sleek glass skyscraper. I took the private elevator up and walked into the lobby. The receptionist, a young girl who always looked terrified of David, blinked at me in surprise. Mrs. Sterling, David didn't mention you were coming in. He's in the main glass conference room with some major investors and... Well, Chloe. That's fine, I said, offering a polite smile. I'm not here to interrupt. I'll just wait in the lobby. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the conference room, I could see them. David was standing at the head of a massive mahogany table, gesturing grandly at a PowerPoint presentation about emerging offshore opportunities. Chloe was sitting to his right, wearing a sleek white designer dress, her diamond bracelet catching the morning sun. She looked up, saw me sitting in the lobby, and leaned over to whisper in David's ear. David glanced out the glass, his face twisting into a scowl of pure annoyance. He probably thought I had come to beg, or worse, to make a scene in front of his billionaire clients. He held up a finger to his investors, mouthed, "Excuse me," and started marching toward the conference room door. He never made it. At exactly 9 a.m., the soft ping of the private elevator echoed through the lobby. But the doors didn't just open, they were held open by heavy tactical boots. 12 men and women in dark windbreakers poured into the pristine reception area. Emblazoned across their backs in bold yellow lettering were the acronyms of nightmares, FBI and IRSCI, Criminal Investigation. Federal agents, nobody touch your keyboards. Step away from your desks immediately, the lead agent barked, his voice echoing off the marble floors. The bustling office froze in absolute terror. Analysts dropped their phones. Traders raised their hands in the air. Special Agent Harris, a tall, imposing man with graying hair, walked straight past the trembling receptionist and headed for the glass conference room. David stood frozen halfway to the door, his jaw slack, the color draining from his face until he looked like a wax mannequin. The arrogance evaporated, replaced instantly by the primal fear of a trapped animal. Harris pushed the glass door open. David Sterling, I'm Special Agent Harris with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We have federal warrants for the search and seizure of this premises, all digital servers, and all physical documents related to Apex Capital and Horizon Ventures. David's survival instincts kicked in, but they were fueled by the wrong narrative. He pointed a trembling finger through the glass, straight at me sitting calmly on the lobby sofa. "Wait, listen to me," David stammered, his voice cracking. "I know why you're here. It's the missing $5 million. But I didn't do it. My wife did it. Sarah. She's a forensic accountant. She hacked my network. She forged my signature. I was just about to bring the evidence to the police today. Arrest her." The billionaire investors in the room looked at David, then at me, utterly bewildered. Chloe was pressing herself against the wall, her eyes wide with panic, her hand instinctively covering her diamond bracelet. Agent Harris didn't even turn around to look at me. He just pulled a thick red folder from under his arm. "We know all about the $5 million, Mr. Sterling, and we know exactly who moved it. We have the mirrored metadata from your encrypted silver laptop. We have the GPS logs of your vehicle. We have the flight records to the Caymans." Harris stepped closer, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "And most importantly, we have a fully documented 400-page federal whistleblower report filed by the very woman you just tried to accuse. A report that proves you attempted to frame a licensed CPA for your own federal wire fraud." David's legs seemed to give out. He stumbled back, hitting the edge of the mahogany table. No, she couldn't. She's just..." He looked at me through the glass. I didn't cry. I didn't look angry. I simply gave him the same condescending, dismissive smile he had given me over coffee 3 hours ago. While David was collapsing under the weight of his reality, a female FBI agent approached Chloe. "Chloe Adams?" Chloe burst into tears instantly. "I didn't do anything. I'm just an assistant. I don't know anything about the money." "Really?" the agent asked, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Because corporate records list you as a signing officer for Horizon Ventures, and according to international wire logs, you personally authorized the transfer of $1.2 million to a shell company in Luxembourg last Tuesday. That makes you an accessory to federal money laundering. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." As the cuffs clicked around Chloe's wrist, pinching the skin right next to her $40,000 diamond bracelet, she let out a wail that pierced the quiet of the office. David was next. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He was practically catatonic as Agent Harris read him his Miranda rights and marched him out of his own boardroom in front of the investors he had spent years trying to impress. As they walked him through the lobby toward the elevator, he was forced to pass right by me. He stopped for a second, his eyes pleading, looking for the loyal wife he had used for a decade. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my Armani suit. "I left the house keys on the kitchen counter, David," I said, my voice crisp and clear in the silent room. "Just like you asked." The collapse of Apex Capital wasn't just a news story. It was a financial earthquake that sent shockwaves through the city's elite investment circles. By noon on Friday, federal agents were hauling boxes of physical files and clone servers out of the glass skyscraper. By 2 p.m., the SEC had officially frozen every single asset tied to the firm, David and Horizon Ventures. And by 5 p.m., while I was sitting on my patio enjoying a glass of legitimately purchased Merlot, David was being processed at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in downtown Manhattan. The first thing his expensive defense attorneys tried to do was secure his release on bail. They argued that David was a respected pillar of the financial community with strong ties to the city. But the federal prosecutor didn't even have to argue against it. She simply opened the Operation Overreach packet I had provided. She showed the judge the metadata proving David had falsified federal documents, and more importantly, she produced the receipts for the 2 first-class one-way tickets to the Cayman Islands scheduled for the very next day. The judge took one look at the flight confirmations, slammed his gavel, and declared David an extreme flight risk. There would be no bail. The man who had worn Tom Ford suits and Rolexes was going to spend the next year awaiting trial in a 6 by 9 foot concrete cell, wearing a standard issue orange jumpsuit. Chloe's loyalty to her generous mentor lasted exactly 45 minutes inside the FBI interrogation room. The moment the agents explained that signing fraudulent international wire transfers carried a maximum sentence of 20 years, the illusion of their grand romance shattered. She didn't just flip on David, she practically begged for a plea deal. She handed over the passwords to his secondary encrypted messaging apps, detailed exactly how he coached her to lie to the investors, and surrendered the $40,000 diamond tennis bracelet to the evidence locker. Even with her full cooperation, the judge wasn't lenient. Because of the sheer volume of the money she helped move, Chloe was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security federal women's camp. The big leagues had indeed played for keeps, and she had struck out completely. But the most satisfying victory happened in family court. Because David was incarcerated and his assets were frozen by the federal government under the racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. RICO Act, the high-priced, high-conflict divorce firm he had hired, immediately dropped him as a client. They don't work for free, and David's bank accounts now read zero. I walked into the divorce proceedings represented by a sharp, efficient lawyer, while David had to appear via video link from the federal holding facility, represented by an overworked public defender who clearly despised him. Since I had used my skills as a forensic accountant to meticulously separate my clean, earned income from his fraudulent empire months in advance, the court easily untangled our finances. I was awarded full ownership of the house, my retirement accounts, and all of our legitimate joint savings. David's fabricated morality clause and his claims of my fictional affair were thrown out the window. In fact, because he had attempted to use the family court to further his fraud and frame me, the judge ordered David to pay my legal fees out of whatever minuscule legitimate assets he had left. He had tried to leave me homeless. Instead, he left himself destitute. While David was busy losing his freedom, his mistress, and his marriage, I was dealing with a much more pleasant bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. The IRS whistleblower office operates under Section 7623B of the Internal Revenue Code. It states that if a whistleblower provides specific, credible information that leads to the successful collection of taxes, penalties, and fines exceeding $2 million, the government must pay the informant an award of between 15 and 30% of the collected proceeds. My report hadn't just been a tip, it was a fully audited, mapped, and indexed roadmap of a $5.8 million offshore tax evasion and embezzlement scheme. Because my documentation was so flawless, the federal prosecutors didn't even have to go to trial. Faced with a mountain of undeniable, cryptographically verified evidence, David pleaded guilty to 4 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of tax evasion, and 1 count of witness tampering. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. The government seized the $5.8 million from the Cayman accounts, plus they hit David with an additional $3 million in federal fines, back taxes, and restitution penalties. The total recovery brought in by my single encrypted upload was $8.8 million. It took 14 months for the bureaucratic gears to finish turning, but I will never forget the Tuesday afternoon I walked to my mailbox. Inside was a plain, heavy stock envelope from the United States Department of the Treasury. I opened it at my kitchen island, the same island where David had once condescendingly told me my job was tragically boring. Inside was an official Treasury check, made out to my name. The IRS had awarded me a 20% cut of the recovered funds for my exceptional and comprehensive assistance. I stared at the numbers printed on the check. $1,760,000. It was entirely legal, completely tax-free, and perfectly clean. David had tried to steal $5 million and ended up losing his entire life. I had simply done my job, audited his lies, and walked away an accidental millionaire. The numbers, as always, never lie. And the final balance of David Sterling's life was exactly 0. 2 years after the gavel fell, my life looked entirely different. I didn't just take the $1.76 million and retire to a beach somewhere. That's what David would have done. Instead, I used the IRS reward as seed money to build something permanent. I sold the massive, empty mansion we used to share, the one funded by lies and offshore accounts, and bought a sleek, modern penthouse overlooking the city. But more importantly, I opened my own boutique forensic accounting firm, Vanguard Financial Forensics. My specialty? High net worth divorce cases. I became the ultimate nightmare for every arrogant CEO, every tech bro, and every titan of industry who thought they could hide their assets from their wives. The lawyers in the city quickly learned that if Sarah Sterling was auditing your client's husband, there was no shell company deep enough, no crypto wallet obscure enough, and no offshore trust secure enough to hide the money. My firm was billing thousands of dollars an hour, and I was helping women walk away with the financial security they rightfully deserved. I wasn't just working, I was dismantling the exact type of men that David represented, one perfectly balanced spreadsheet at a time. It was on a rainy Tuesday, exactly 3 years to the day, I found that silver laptop that my assistant brought in the mail. Mixed in with the corporate invoices and legal briefs was a cheap brown envelope. The return address was a federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. I opened it slowly. It was a letter from David. The handwriting, once bold and confident, was now shaky and small. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, disguised as an apology. He wrote about how much he regretted everything, how prison had opened his eyes, and how he thought about me every day. He talked about the harsh conditions, the terrible food, and how the prison soap gave him a severe rash. But the real reason for the letter was buried in the 4th paragraph. He was begging. He asked if, out of the goodness of my heart, I could deposit a few $100s into his prison commissary account so he could buy decent ramen noodles, a radio, and some hydrocortisone cream. The man who once bought a 24-year-old girl a $40,000 diamond tennis bracelet with stolen money was now begging his ex-wife for ramen noodle money. I sat at my custom mahogany desk, looking out over the city skyline, and read the letter a second time. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I felt absolutely nothing. He was just a closed account, a bad debt that had already been written off and rectified. I took out my heavy, embossed company stationery and a high-end fountain pen. I didn't write a long letter back. I simply wrote, David, I have audited your request for funds. Your account balance remains exactly where it belongs. 0. Do not contact me again. I sealed the envelope, handed it to my assistant to mail, and went back to my work. I didn't send him a single cent. Let him eat the canned tuna. Looking back at the wreckage of Apex Capital and the man who tried to destroy me, I realized something fundamental about power. People think power is loud. They think it's a roaring Porsche, a bespoke suit, or the ability to scream at a room full of investors. They think power is about commanding attention and taking whatever you want without consequences. But real power is silent. Real power is knowing exactly where the bodies are buried because you're the one who audits the graveyard. David's fatal flaw wasn't just his greed. It was his profound underestimation of the person standing right next to him. He thought that because I was quiet, I was weak. He thought that because my job was boring, my mind was simple. He built an entire criminal empire, assuming that the woman balancing his checkbook wouldn't notice the blood on the ledger. If there is a lesson to be learned from the smoking crater that used to be David Sterling's life, it's this. Never betray the person who knows your passwords. Never try to frame the person who does your taxes. And most importantly, never assume that a quiet woman is a harmless one. Sometimes the most dangerous predator in the room isn't the one baring their teeth, it's the one quietly doing the math.